She thought first class meant control. She thought quiet prejudice could fly under the radar. But when she tried to have a quiet black man removed just because he didn't look the part, she didn't know she had just picked a fight. With the federal agent on official duty, what happened next? It shattered her image. It ended her career, and it exposed a truth she had spent her whole life hiding from. Stay with us to witness a story where silence holds power, arrogance meets accountability, and one woman learns too late that status can't protect you from the truth. This is not just a flight. This is a reckoning. Patricia Langford strode through the gleaming halls of Los Angeles International Airport with a presence that demanded attention. She didn't walk like an ordinary traveler. She moved like a woman accustomed to being watched, respected, and obeyed. Her stiletto heels clicked rhythmically against the polished floor, echoing softly beneath the vaulted ceilings of the international terminal. A cream-colored cashmere coat framed her silhouette like it was custom-made for this exact moment. Draped across her shoulder was a structured handbag from a limited-edition Parisian collection, while a sleek, noiseless Rimowa suitcase glided in tow, more an accessory than luggage. Her platinum blonde hair, swept into a low chignon, was as precise as her reputation. Elegant, curated, immaculate. Patricia Langford wasn't just a name, she was a brand. As the CEO of Langford Estates, one of the country's most exclusive luxury real estate firms, she had spent decades building a public image of refinement, philanthropy, and polished morality. She had sat on diversity panels, spoken on corporate responsibility, and even appeared on televised forums about inclusivity in business. People quoted her, admired her, feared her. The display board ahead flashed. Gate A17, priority boarding now open, flight to San Francisco. Patricia didn't so much as glance at it. She knew the choreography by heart. First class was not a luxury for her. It was standard. It was expected. It was deserved. She passed through the priority lane with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and a subtle nod to the flight attendant, who greeted her with trained cheerfulness. But then, as she approached her assigned seat 2A, as always her eyes caught something that made her steps falter. In 2B, the aisle seat beside hers, sat a man, a black man, young, mid-30s perhaps, with smooth skin and sharp features. He was wearing a dark windbreaker over a simple t-shirt, dark jeans, and sneakers. At his feet was a well-worn backpack, nothing fancy. He wasn't sipping champagne or flipping through a business journal like the other passengers. Instead, he was scrolling quietly through his phone, earphones draped around his neck. His posture was relaxed, his expression unreadable. He didn't look up, he didn't acknowledge her, and that unsettled Patricia more than she cared to admit. She blinked once, as if expecting the image to change. Her fingers gripped the handle of her suitcase a little tighter. There was no mistake her name was on the boarding pass, and this was definitely her row. But so was he. Without a word, she lifted her suitcase into the overhead bin with a hint more force than necessary, settled into 2A, and smoothed her coat as she adjusted her seat. But the tightness in her jaw remained. She turned her head just enough to glance at him, subtly scanning. No wedding ring, no corporate badge, no first-class demeanor at least. Not the kind she was accustomed to. And yet, he looked perfectly at ease, as though this seat, this space was his by right. That, more than anything, disturbed her, in her world. Appearances told a story, and this one didn't fit. She shifted, recrossed her legs, and exhaled slowly. He still hadn't looked at her. Her lips curled, faint and almost imperceptible, into a polite but icy smile as she gazed ahead. The flight hadn't taken off yet, but Patricia Langford already knew. This wasn't going to be a peaceful journey. Patricia sat rigidly in her seat, the leather armrest pressing against her forearm as the plane's cabin began to fill with other first-class passengers. Businessmen in tailored suits, women in designer blouses, a retired senator she vaguely recognized from a gala in Napa. They all moved with the same quiet entitlement she was used to. The world in this cabin was one of whispered deals, curated travel playlists, and sparkling wine poured before takeoff. It was supposed to be familiar, predictable, exclusive, except it wasn't, because the man next to her, this man who had neither flinched nor acknowledged her presence, was still there. He had earbuds resting loosely around his neck now, though he hadn't used them. His phone screen was still lit, displaying what appeared to be a document on aviation policy paragraphs and bullet points about something far too official to be mere reading material. But Patricia didn't process the content. She focused instead on his posture, his silence, his audacity. He hadn't glanced at her, not once. In her world, people noticed her. Men offered conversation. Women complimented her coat. Staff stood a little straighter. But this man had the nerve to ignore her. Not in a dismissive way, no. That would have given her something to fight against. This was worse. He was indifferent, as if her presence carried no weight at all. She coughed softly, shifted, then reached for her designer tote and accidentally let the strap brush against his arm. Nothing, not even a reflexive jerk. He didn't turn his head, didn't mutter a perfunctory apology. He just existed there. Like he belonged. It was infuriating. Patricia's fingers tightened around the edge of the tote as she set it down with exaggerated care. The stewardess, Sophia, was still assisting a couple near the rear of the first-class section. Patricia let her eyes wander deliberately, then made a decision. Her chin lifted slightly. Her expression softened into a pleasant mask, the one she wore when she needed something to go her way, without revealing her true motives. She leaned ever so slightly toward the man beside her, just enough to make it clear that now she had decided to acknowledge him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice like polished glass, smooth but clipped. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" The man didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't even look up. "Yes," he said. That was it, a single word. No elaboration, no defensiveness, no discomfort. Patricia blinked. She had expected at least a moment of nervousness, a fumbling for a ticket, a hint of insecurity. But there was none. His tone was calm, confident, almost official. She sat back slowly, as if the answer hadn't quite registered. Her brain raced to fill in the blanks. Maybe it was a last-minute upgrade. Maybe someone had switched tickets. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he knew someone at the airline and pulled strings. But he doesn't look like... She stopped herself. That last thought lingered too long. Across the aisle, a young woman with purple nails and mirrored sunglasses smirked slightly. Patricia wasn't sure if it was directed at her, but it felt like it. She turned forward again, spine straighter, breath tighter. This wasn't about race. Not explicitly. At least, not yet. But it was about belonging, and she was absolutely certain he didn't. Yet somehow, the man beside her gave off the air of someone who knew exactly what she was thinking, and didn't care one bit. Patricia couldn't shake the feeling. It curled like smoke in her chest, unwelcome. Acrid, impossible to ignore. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, forcing her expression into serenity. But inside, irritation rippled like static electricity. He hadn't looked at her once since that brief exchange. Yes, one word, delivered like a gavel strike. No hesitation, no apology, no glance upward to acknowledge her social cues. Her tone, her unspoken challenge. In her world, that was insubordination, even disrespect. She leaned back, lips pressed thin. The first-class cabin had nearly filled now. She could hear a pair of women 2 rows behind laughing softly over a podcast. And somewhere further back, the hum of coach passengers settling into cramped rows. The plane's atmosphere was the usual calm before takeoff. But Patricia felt anything but calm. She glanced at the call button above her, then back at him. The man, Jordan, she would learn later, had finally pocketed his phone and was now simply sitting, eyes closed, as though he were mentally reviewing something important. The corners of his mouth were relaxed, unreadable. He looked prepared, and that unsettled her most of all. With a quiet exhale through her nose, Patricia pressed the call button. The soft chime sounded, melodic but firm enough to draw a few heads without causing alarm. A second later, Sophia approached from the front galley. Her warm, practiced smile never wavered, though her eyes flicked between Patricia and the man beside her with barely concealed curiosity. "Yes, ma'am?" Sophia asked, professional but attentive. Patricia turned to her with a half smile, injecting a mild chuckle as if to downplay the weight of what she was about to say. I think there's been a little mix-up," she said lightly. "I believe this gentleman may be in the wrong seat." Sophia blinked, then quickly brought up the flight manifest on her tablet. Her fingers moved with smooth efficiency. She didn't even have to ask for names. The software linked seating to passenger records automatically. "Mr. Hale," Sophia asked gently. Jordan opened his eyes and nodded once. "You're in 2B, she confirmed. "And, yes, everything looks correct." "Miss Langford, you're in 2A. No issues here." Patricia's smile tightened. "That's odd," she murmured, voice still sugar-coated. "I just assumed, well, never mind." Sophia hesitated for a moment. Her training told her something was amiss, but nothing explicit had been said. She offered a polite nod and turned to leave. But as she walked away, her brows subtly pinched together. Jordan, meanwhile, had already closed his eyes again. And Patricia? Patricia's hands were trembling in her lap. Not out of fear, out of frustration. She had played her opening move. Lightly, elegantly, and it had been countered, dismissed, neutralized as if she had never made it at all. This wasn't over. No, it was just beginning. Patricia sat perfectly still, but her mind was churning, her perfectly tailored blouse, tucked immaculately beneath her cashmere coat, now felt tight against her skin. She couldn't recall the last time someone had brushed aside her concerns so effortlessly, certainly not in public, and definitely not in first class. Her gaze drifted again to the man beside her. Jordan Hale hadn't moved. He seemed to exist in his own steady orbit, completely undisturbed by the silent war waging inches from his shoulder. That stillness wasn't passive. It was deliberate, a quiet power, and Patricia hated that she felt small in its presence. She shifted in her seat, repositioned her designer tote, and crossed her legs with more force than necessary. She wanted him to react, to flinch, to do something that would justify what she was about to do next. But he didn't. He never even opened his eyes. Her fingers twitched slightly before she pressed the call button again. The chime rang a second time, and this time, the response was slower. When Sophia returned, her smile remained, but it was tighter now, less natural. She stopped at Patricia's row, one hand resting gently on the back of the seat in front of them. "Is everything all right?" "Ma'am?" she asked, already sensing the direction this was heading. Patricia leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if preparing to confide something serious, something delicate. Her tone softened, took on the edge of vulnerability. Carefully calculated, "I'd like to request a seat change," she said, almost apologetically. Sophia blinked once. "Oh, is something wrong with your seat, ma'am?" Patricia hesitated, just long enough to add weight to what she wouldn't say out loud. "No, not the seat." She tilted her head ever so slightly toward Jordan, then exhaled. "I just don't feel comfortable." There it was. Not an accusation, not a complaint, just a suggestion, but a poisonous one. Sophia stood straighter. Her smile faded, not rudely, but into something more neutral, more alert. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said carefully. "If there's a technical issue or if you need additional accommodations, it's not technical." Patricia cut in gently. I'd feel better sitting somewhere else." Jordan still hadn't moved, but his fingers, resting on the tray table, stopped drumming. Sophia glanced at him, then back at Patricia. She didn't ask why Patricia felt uncomfortable. She didn't have to. The implication hung in the air like a low voltage. "I'll check to see if we have any alternate seats available," Sophia said, her tone now strictly professional. She tapped quickly on her tablet. Patricia leaned back, exhaling as though she had done something terribly unpleasant but necessary. She folded her hands in her lap and smiled tightly, eyes forward, pretending not to feel the growing weight of attention. Because now, people were watching. A man in a blazer across the aisle lowered his newspaper. A woman 2 rows ahead glanced back, her brows drawn. Sophia's voice returned after a few seconds. "I'm afraid we're at full capacity in first class today, ma'am. However, there are 2 open seats in the economy." The word struck Patricia like a slap. "Economy," she repeated, as if Sophia had just suggested she sit in the cargo hold. "That's not acceptable." "Then I'm afraid you'll need to remain in your assigned seat," Sophia said gently but firmly. "Unless there's an emergency, we cannot move other passengers from first class." Patricia smiled again, but it was paper thin. Her jaw clenched beneath it. This wasn't going how she planned. But she wasn't done. She never lost battles in public. And this one wouldn't be the first. Patricia's smile had become a mask painted on, brittle and cracking at the corners, as Sophia turned to walk away. Patricia's gaze snapped to the back of her head with a sharpness that could cut glass. No, this wasn't acceptable. She had been told no, and that word did not exist in Patricia Langford's vocabulary. Her pulse began to quicken, and not from embarrassment, from indignation. She had built an empire by controlling spaces, conversations, and people, and now, in a setting she considered her sanctuary, first class, her authority was being quietly, subtly dismantled by a man who hadn't even said a word, by a flight attendant who had the gall to treat her like any other passenger, and by a cabin of strangers who were now clearly tuned in to her every movement. No, this wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about control, and she intended to take it back. She pressed the call button a third time. This time, Sophia approached slowly, her shoulders tighter, her expression neutral, but the edge in her eyes unmistakable. "Ma'am," she said evenly. Patricia straightened in her seat and lowered her voice, though not enough to escape notice. "I need to speak to someone in charge," she said, coolly. "The head crew member or the pilot?" A low murmur ran through the first-class cabin. It was faint, but real. A ripple of curiosity, of tension. "I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight," Sophia replied, her tone still calm. "Is there something you need clarified? I don't feel safe," Patricia said. The words were simple, but their meaning detonated like a small explosion. Sophia's face hardened. She blinked once, slowly, and her entire posture shifted. A few rows back, someone audibly muttered, "Here we go." Another passenger, now fully tuned in, subtly tilted their phone, recording at an upward angle beneath a scarf. Jordan's hands, until now resting motionless on the tray table, slowly folded together. He didn't look at her. Not yet. Sophia remained still. "Could you clarify what you mean?" "Ma'am?" Patricia turned slightly in her seat, hands folded neatly in her lap, like a woman asking for nothing more than fairness. "I'm not saying I'm being threatened," she replied, voice dripping in restraint. I feel deeply uncomfortable, and I don't think I should be forced to remain in a situation where I feel unsafe." The words had been rehearsed. She had said similar things in boardrooms, in HR complaints, in behind-the-scenes whispers that got people removed. She had always known how to use language like a scalpel, but what she hadn't counted on was using it on him. Jordan finally turned his head and looked at her. It wasn't angry. It wasn't smug. His expression was unreadable calm, detached, but it was direct. And Patricia, for the first time that morning, felt something shift deep in her chest, a flicker of uncertainty, of fear but not of him, of being exposed. She looked away quickly, as if she could escape the weight of his gaze. But it was too late. The word had been said, and now the cabin was no longer neutral ground. Now the air was thick with judgment, discomfort, and scrutiny, and Patricia could feel it closing in. The silence that followed Patricia's declaration was thick, unspoken, but thunderous. Passengers shifted in their seats, heads subtly turning, a cough from the back row, the unmistakable buzz of a phone camera still recording. Someone pretended to scroll their emails, but their eyes were fixed on Patricia. The tension was no longer isolated. It had spread. Sophia stood straighter, arms loosely crossed in front of her, voice carefully level. "Ma'am," she said, "just to confirm, you're saying you feel unsafe because of your seatmate." Patricia hesitated, not because she was unsure of her answer, but because she now felt the weight of every eye in the cabin watching her. She had said what she always said in moments like this. Not too loud, not directly accusatory, just enough to trigger intervention. It always worked before. It was subtle, socially engineered, just like her. "I didn't say that," she replied smoothly, offering a restrained shrug. "I simply said I don't feel comfortable." Her voice, carefully modulated, carried the exact tone that said, "You know what I mean?" But Sophia didn't budge. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man with a Bluetooth earpiece muttered, "Unbelievable." A young woman 2 rows back lowered her sunglasses and raised her phone higher, now recording openly. The angle was unmistakable. Patricia's face in profile. Jordan seated calmly beside her, the tension electric between them. Jordan hadn't moved. He sat still, his face unreadable, hands resting lightly on his lap. But his silence was no longer passive. It was a mirror, and Patricia was starting to see herself reflected in it. "This is a simple request," she said, her voice lifting just slightly. "If a passenger doesn't feel safe, they should be accommodated. That's standard protocol, isn't it?" Sophia's jaw tightened. "With respect, ma'am," she said, tone now clipped but controlled. "You're asking us to move another passenger, who is in his correct, assigned first-class seat, to a different class, solely based on your personal feelings. That's not a standard accommodation." Patricia blinked. She hadn't expected that. "Well, then move me," she snapped quietly. "There are 2 seats available in economy," Sophia replied without missing a beat. "Would you like one of them?" Patricia's lips curled into a tight, offended smile. "That won't be necessary." Sophia gave a slow nod, her eyes steady. "Then I'll ask you to remain in your seat, ma'am." And with that, she turned and walked away. leaving Patricia alone in a row that suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. The damage had been done. The spell had broken. Jordan turned his head and calmly closed his tray table, then folded his hands in front of him and looked ahead. Composed, the woman recording zoomed in, her lens now catching Patricia's face directly, her tight smile fading, her neck stiff, her eyes darting nervously across the cabin. The smirks from the passengers weren't loud, but they were sharp. And in that moment, for the first time, Patricia Langford realized something terrifying. No one was on her side. Patricia's breath came shallow now, barely masked by her practiced exterior. She felt it, the shift, the eyes. The silence was laced with judgment. She was used to commanding attention. But this was different. This wasn't admiration. This was scrutiny, and it made her skin crawl. She sat up straighter, trying to reclaim the moment, trying to reassert herself. They don't know who I am, she thought. They don't know I've chaired diversity boards, given TED Talks about equity and leadership. I've written op-eds on systemic bias. This can't be happening to me. But it was happening, and the man beside her, the one who had triggered this unraveling, was still impossibly calm. That silence was unbearable, so she broke it. Again, her fingers slammed the call button a final time. The tone chimed like a challenge. Sophia returned, but this time, her entire demeanor had changed. No more courtesy, no more careful diplomacy. Her hands were clasped, her feet square. She was done tiptoeing. "Yes, ma'am," she said flatly. "I want to speak to the captain," Patricia said, louder now, clearer. The edge in her voice was unmistakable. "I'm escalating this." Across the aisle, someone whispered, "Oh, she's really going there." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "The captain is in final takeoff preparation. He's unavailable. I am the senior crew member on board. This ends with me." Patricia's nostrils flared. Her tone sharpened into something brittle. "This man is making me feel unsafe. He hasn't said a word to me since I boarded. He refuses to acknowledge my presence, and I don't know why. I'm simply asking for protection." That word protection hung in the air like poison. Sophia didn't flinch, but Jordan moved, slowly, calmly, precisely. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. No sudden motion, no raised voice, just a quiet shift in atmosphere as he flipped it open. In the harsh cabin lighting, the badge gleamed gold. The words beneath it were clear: United States Department of Homeland Security, Transportation Security Administration, Special Security Consultant. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The woman filming zoomed in. Someone gasped softly. Even Sophia took a half step back. Blinking, Patricia froze. Jordan finally turned his head, his voice low and even, steady as stone. "Ma'am," he said, "would you like to file an official complaint?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Her face turned ghostly pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. Jordan continued, "Because making false security claims on a federally monitored flight is a serious allegation, and I'm happy to take your statement." Right now, silence. No one moved. No one whispered. No one breathed. Patricia couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but only a strangled whisper emerged. I didn't." Jordan didn't blink. "I'd advise you," he said gently, "to choose your next words carefully." And in that moment, the power shifted completely. Patricia's throat constricted. Her voice caught in a place between defiance and collapse. The badge still open in Jordan's calm, steady hands was a mirror, and she was staring straight into her own undoing. The cabin hadn't returned to normal. It had transformed. What was once polite curiosity had now sharpened into moral judgment, and it was pointed directly at her. Jordan said nothing more. He didn't need to. His silence now held weight, authority, legitimacy, and she had tried to move him to the economy. Sophia didn't say a word either. She stood to the side, arms crossed loosely, her expression unreadable, but there was a quiet understanding in her eyes. Not anger, not contempt, something worse. Disappointment. Patricia turned forward, the leather of her seat suddenly too stiff, the cabin air too thin. She could feel it, phones capturing her profile, whispers multiplying like ripples on still water. Every angle recorded, every blink dissected. Across the aisle, the man with the Bluetooth earpiece muttered with a grin. Instant karma. A younger woman smirked behind her phone, fingers already dancing across the screen as she typed a caption. White lady accuses black man of being a threat. Turns out he's federal security. LMAO, hashtag, flight fail. Patricia's fingers curled tightly in her lap. She tried to focus on her breathing, Inhale, exhale. It's fine. It's salvageable. She had made mistakes before, nothing she couldn't spin. She would explain. Clarify. Regain the narrative. But then her phone vibrated. Once, twice, a third time. She hesitated before reaching into her bag. Her hand shook as she pulled it out. 3 unread texts lit up the screen. From a fellow board member at the Marston Foundation. From a former client in Boston. From her niece. Of all people, each message bore some version of the same question. Patricia, is this you? Please tell me this video isn't real. You're trending? Call me. Her stomach dropped. With a trembling thumb, she opened her browser and tapped on Twitter. And there it was. Her name, right beneath the hashtags, Flying While Black and Do Better Patricia. Over 83 auto views. In less than 15 minutes, the video had been trimmed, captioned, and set to dramatic music. A side-by-side comparison had already emerged. One clip showing Patricia giving a speech about diversity at a charity gala last year, and the other, her face frozen mid-sneer, accusing a federal agent of being a threat for existing beside her. She tried to swallow. Couldn't. A bead of sweat traced her temple. It wasn't just public embarrassment. It was an implosion. And Patricia Langford, woman of image and prowage, realized something no press consultant could fix. She had written her own downfall, and the ink had already dried. The wheels touched down in San Francisco with a muted thud. But for Patricia Langford, it may as well have been the final nail in a coffin. The usual applause from anxious travelers didn't come. The cabin remained subdued, like a courtroom after a damning verdict. As the plane taxied toward the gate, she stared out the window, blinking rapidly, willing herself not to cry, not here. Not in front of them. Jordan had already tucked his badge away. He didn't gloat, didn't gawk, didn't speak another word. He simply reopened his tray table, took out a tablet, and began reviewing documents like nothing had happened. That composure made everything worse. Patricia, meanwhile, sat stone still, her hands folded over her trembling phone. Her video was now at over 140. War views. Comment after comment scrolled across her feed like lashes across her back. When Karen meets karma, she had the audacity and the platform unreal. Didn't she give that fake inclusion speech last year? The hypocrisy wasn't just exposed. It was dissected, replayed, mocked, and magnified. She barely heard the pilot's voice over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Local time is 5:43 p.m. Please remain seated while we arrive at the gate. As soon as the seatbelt sign went off, Patricia stood too quickly, nearly knocking her bag into Jordan's lap. He didn't react, just moved slightly to give her space. But she felt at that invisible wall between them. Forged not by hostility, but by truth, she exited the aircraft first, moving fast, desperate to disappear into the anonymity of the terminal. But as she stepped through the jet bridge, she froze. There, waiting near the baggage claim area, was a small crowd, not a mob yet, but enough. 2 local news crews, a live streamer with a ring light, a woman holding a mic with a logo Patricia recognized from morning cable news, and they were looking right at her. That's her, someone whispered, then louder. It's her. The reporter stepped forward. Miss Langford, do you have any comment about the incident on the flight? Is it true you tried to have a federal agent removed from first class? Do you still represent the Marston Foundation? Patricia spun away, nearly tripping over her own heels as she rushed for the exit. Her phone buzzed in her palm again and again. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't not. The latest call, unknown number. She answered, breathless, hello. A pause, then a clipped, familiar voice. Patricia, this is James Rollins, chairman of the Marston Foundation. Her heart sank. We're aware of the situation, he said. The video has circulated internally. The board has voted unanimously. We'll be issuing a public statement by morning. No, James. Wait, she stammered, panic bleeding into her voice. This isn't. We expect your resignation. By tonight, click. The line went dead. She stood frozen in the middle of the terminal, the world spinning around her. Flashbulbs, whispers, judgment. Her career was collapsing in real time, and she couldn't stop any of it. Behind her, Jordan Hale walked calmly toward the exit, his tablet tucked under his arm. He didn't even glance her way, because for him, this was just another Tuesday. Patricia sat in the back of the taxi like a ghost in designer clothing. Her coat, once a symbol of status and poise, now clung to her like a costume she no longer belonged in. The driver didn't speak. He didn't need to. From the moment she threw herself into the cab and barked, "Go!" He had glanced at her only once, and that look had said everything. I've seen the video. Her phone buzzed again. She let it vibrate against her thigh, too afraid to look. When it stopped, another message pinged, then another. The silence that followed each was worse than the noise. She finally picked it up. Her hands were shaking. A text from a PR agency she'd worked with for over a decade. In light of the recent incident, we are terminating all affiliation effective immediately. Her email inbox had exploded. Subject lines blurred into one another. Urgent, press inquiry, termination of partnership agreement, client dissociation, Langford Properties. She opened Twitter again, against her better judgment. Her name was no longer trending in her city. It was trending nationally. Someone had pulled an old clip from a business conference, where she'd stood on stage saying, "Inclusion isn't just a buzzword, it's who we are. It's about creating space for everyone, no matter their background." And then, side by side, the grainy footage from the flight, she said, "I just don't feel safe." The way her voice dropped, the implication was so sharp, so cutting, that the public didn't need context. One tweet with the video had reached 2 million views. One comment read, "She's not just a hypocrite, she's the template." Another, "The badge didn't humble her. The internet will..." She felt heat rise in her chest, not the righteous fire of denial, but the slow burn of knowing she was guilty, knowing there would be no clever statement to erase this, no crisis manager, no spin. She opened her notes app to draft a response, but every version started the same. "This was taken out of context," or "I have always stood for diversity," or "as someone who has worked with underrepresented communities," and each one felt more hollow than the last. She deleted them all. Her phone buzzed again. A call, "Mom." She stared at it. The one woman who had always believed she was better than her ambition. She let it ring. Declined. Because what was she going to say? That she had just tried to remove a federal agent from a flight because he didn't fit her idea of first class. That her entire legacy was unraveling because she couldn't stand sitting next to a man who never even spoke to her. The cab slowed. Through the window, she saw a crowd gathered outside her building. Paparazzi. Neighbors. Maybe even protesters. She ducked down in her seat, but she couldn't hide anymore. Not from them. Not from herself. Not from the truth. The elevator ride to the penthouse had never felt so long. The polished chrome walls that once reflected a powerful woman now mocked her with every silent second. Patricia stared at her own reflection. Skin pale, eyes rimmed red, hair coming undone from its perfect bun. "This isn't who I am," she whispered inside, but some part of her a quieter, older voice responded cruelly. "Isn't it?" When the doors slid open, the silence inside her home felt oppressive. No assistance. No emails chirping with deals to approve. No vase of fresh white orchids like she ordered every Monday. The housekeeper had texted earlier to say she wouldn't be coming in, need to take time off. Sorry for the short notice. No one wanted to be seen near her now. She walked toward the living room, each step so heavy. The city skyline stretched wide through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. But Patricia didn't look. Her phone buzzed again this time. From a number she recognized. Her daughter, Jessica. She answered immediately, her voice hoarse. "Sweetheart." There was a pause. Then a voice, small but steady. "I saw it." "Mom?" Patricia closed her eyes. "Jess, I made a mistake. I let something get under my skin. It was about race. Wasn't it?" Jessica's tone didn't waver. "You didn't like how he looked. How he sat there like he belonged. And you thought if you smiled while doing it, no one would call it what it was." Patricia sat down hard on the edge of her sofa, every word slicing through the last remains of her denial. "You know me?" she whispered. "You know, I'm not that person." There was a long silence. Then, softly, "I thought I did." Click. The call ended. Patricia stared at the phone in her hand, not moving for what felt like hours. Her shoulders slumped. The lights of the city blinked behind her. Her past speeches, her televised interviews, her curated social posts, they all rang false now. A performance. And she wasn't the hero of her story. She was the lesson, the warning, the consequence. Her empire had been built on image. But that image cracked the moment truth entered seat 2B and refused to be small. And now, in the silence of her luxury cage, Patricia Langford realized something she had spent her entire life avoiding. She had always believed in equality, as long as it didn't ask her to give up her seat. Miles away from the chaos Patricia had unleashed and now drowned in, Jordan Hale stepped off the escalator at a quiet government annex building in downtown San Francisco. He wore the same windbreaker, the same steady posture, but here, among these halls of marble and muted carpet, no one looked twice at him. No cameras, no accusations. Just colleagues nodding silently as he passed. He reached his floor, tapped his badge against the scanner, and walked into a small, glass-walled conference room. Inside, a few agents sat waiting, some in suits, others in jeans and polos. Casual, efficient, trusted. Jordan sat at the head of the table and opened his tablet. "You good?" One of them asked, half joking. He looked up, expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said. "One of those mornings." Another agent smirked. "That was you on Flight 384, the Langford incident. The whole office is talking about it." Jordan didn't smile. He just said, "It's being handled," and that was it. No rant, no revenge fantasy, no dramatic breakdown, just the weight of experience of being a black man in America who had learned long ago that justice often arrives with less noise and more patience. He flipped through the report on the screen. Now updates on gate security analytics. Let's move. Outside that room, the video still raged across social media. Patricia's name was on every trending chart. News anchors debated what should happen next. Crisis PR firms scrambled, think pieces flooded inboxes. But Jordan Hale, he went back to work, because for him, this wasn't viral. It was routine. He had met 100 Patricia Langfords before, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in elevators, and yes, in first class. And he had learned long ago that his dignity was not something anyone else had the power to grant or to take away. In that quiet conference room, surrounded by people who saw him for his work, not the color of his skin, he leaned back slightly and let out a breath. It wasn't relief. It was resolved, because while the world dissected Patricia's downfall, Jordan knew the real story wasn't her fall. It was his rise silent, steady, unstoppable. By morning, Patricia Langford's name wasn't just trending, it had become a punchline. Satirical memes paired her face with mock airline slogans. Flying first class, thinking second class. Caution, this passenger may be allergic to equality. On national television, polished anchors sat behind gleaming desks dissecting the incident. Words like microaggression, coded bias, and weaponized discomfort bounced from screen to screen. And Patricia's carefully constructed image was reduced to seconds of viral shame. Clips from her keynote speeches were now ironic montages online. One video cut between her saying, "Inclusion is who we are," and her turning away from Jordan on the flight. The internet had crowned her with a new title, the diversity fraud. She watched it all from her apartment, curled on the couch, wrapped in an old cardigan that still smelled like her mother's lavender drawer, sachets. Her phone was a war zone, calls from her attorney, emails from former sponsors demanding refunds, publicists urging silence while others begged for a statement. But there was no statement that could rewrite what millions had already seen. Then came the final blow. Her lawyer called, voice tight and urgent. "Patricia, the Langford name is being removed from the foundation." She sat up. "What are you talking about? The board voted this morning. They're rebranding. You'll be receiving documents within the hour. You no longer have control, and you're being removed from the board of trustees entirely." "But it's my name," she said, her voice hollow. "My family's name." "Not anymore," he replied quietly. Click. She stared at the phone in her lap. The Langford Foundation had been her life's crowning achievement, a symbol of her legacy, one she thought would carry her name long after she was gone. But now, it was gone before she was. The world had moved on, and Patricia was no longer part of the narrative, except as a cautionary tale. She stood slowly, walked to the mirror in the foyer, and looked at herself. No camera crews. No makeup, no lighting crew. Just her, a woman stripped of applause, of the platform, of performance. And for the first time, she saw it. The reflexive entitlement, the cold assumptions, the comfortable cruelty was wrapped in polite tones. She hadn't just lost her career. She had lost who she thought she was. And she couldn't blame anyone. Not the media, not the internet, not Jordan Hale. She had done it, to herself. 3 days passed before Patricia dared to step outside. 3 days of drawn curtains, muted TV reports, and the dull ache of shame tightening like a rope around her chest. She hadn't eaten much. Her inbox had ballooned past 1,000 unread messages. Her phone, once a lifeline to power, now felt like a ticking time bomb she couldn't bear to touch. But the world didn't pause for her. And eventually, she had to face it. The hallway of her luxury building was quieter than usual, too quiet. The concierge, normally eager with greetings and smiles, nodded curtly without meeting her eyes. No one offered small talk in the elevator. Even the florist downstairs, who used to compliment her heels, pretended not to notice her at all. Outside, the California sky was bright, blinding. The light stung her eyes, or maybe it was just the weight of knowing she'd been seen, truly seen for the first time in decades. She wore sunglasses now, not as a fashion statement, but as armor. A hoodie was borrowed from the back of her closet, sneakers instead of stilettos. There was no limo today, no assistant, just her and her own footsteps on the pavement. A block away, two teenagers sat on a bench, scrolling through a phone and laughing. She didn't have to guess what they were watching. A mother pushing a stroller crossed the street to avoid passing directly beside her. A man with a coffee glanced up, furrowed his brow, and then took out his phone, just in case. Patricia kept walking, not quickly, not proudly, just steadily. She stopped at a cafe. She used to love one where her regular order used to appear before she even sat down. But today, no one greeted her by name. The barista looked up, expression neutral, and simply said, "What can I get you?" She hesitated. I'll just take a coffee." To go. Yes, she waited in silence, and when it was ready, she took the paper cup with both hands as though it were a fragile offering from a life she no longer belonged to. As she stepped out, a woman holding a toddler stared at her, not with hate, not with sympathy, but with something worse, recognition. And that was the moment Patricia understood something terrifying and liberating at once. There was no coming back, no redemption arc waiting in the wings, no viral apology video that would flip the narrative, no slick press statement that could undo what she had done. If she wanted to rebuild, she couldn't start with others. She had to start with herself. Not for approval, not for forgiveness, but because, for the first time in her life, she realized that the most dangerous thing she ever carried was her silence when it mattered. Months passed, seasons turned, and Patricia Langford, once a headline, once a brand, once a woman whose name opened doors, was no longer part of the national conversation. The world had moved on, other scandals, other headlines. The algorithm always finds new prey, but Patricia had not moved on. She had vanished. Her penthouse went up for sale. Her foundation's name was scrubbed clean from buildings. Former colleagues stopped returning her emails. PR firms declined her calls. Even the panels she once hosted on corporate empathy had quietly replaced her with newer, younger, more palatable faces. She rented a modest apartment outside the city, now one with creaky stairs and no concierge. Her neighbors didn't know who she was, or if they did, they didn't say it. She no longer corrected them when they called her Trish. Her wardrobe shrank. Her inbox was cleared. Her world quieted. At first, it felt like exile. But then something changed. One Saturday, at a tiny bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a corner deli, she saw him, Jordan Hale, standing by the non-fiction aisle, reading the back of a book about policy reform. He wore no badge, no windbreaker, just jeans, a navy sweater, and the same calm presence she remembered from seat 2B. He hadn't seen her yet. She froze, unsure whether to run or approach. But then, without looking up, he spoke. "I figured I'd run into you eventually." She stepped forward slowly, like a child walking barefoot across broken glass. "I didn't expect you to remember me," she said, her voice quiet. He turned to her. His face was unreadable, as always. But there was no venom there, just weight, experience. "I remember everyone who tries to rewrite the rules mid-flight," he replied. She opened her mouth, but no words came. "I'm not here to shame you," he added calmly. "That's not my work. The world already handled that." She nodded once. It did. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the bookstore filling the space between them. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Finally, she swallowed. Every second, he nodded, then turned back to the shelf. "Then don't waste the aftermath." That was it. No forgiveness, no grand lesson, just the truth, handed to her like a key. She didn't ask for more. She left the store without buying anything, just holding that one sentence like a lantern in the dark. Back home, she opened her laptop not to craft a press release, but to register for a community program that worked with high school girls from underserved neighborhoods. no cameras. No speeches, just presence. Real, flawed, and quiet. And as she hit submit, for the first time in her life, Patricia Langford wasn't performing. She was becoming. If this story made you reflect on silence, on privilege, on the invisible battles people face, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because change doesn't start with noise, it starts with awareness, with listening, and with the courage to do better, long after the cameras stop rolling. Subscribe for more powerful real-life stories. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed a moment where silence spoke louder than words? Let's keep the conversation going.